Streetlights shiver against low clouds. Pages crinkle under a desk lamp, edges browned by the kind of heat that only time gives. We return to the map pocked with pins. Vallejo, Lake Berryessa, Presidio Heights, every string sun-faded to pale rope. Last time, the hood stitched with a white crosshair drifted across a lake shore. A yellow cab stopped at a corner and did not move again. Letters arrived with a laugh no one could quite hear. Anagrams turned to riddles, turned to taunts. Police radios coughed. The scent of stamp gum, of old glue and printer's ink clung to gloved hands. Nothing settled. Each step closer drew the ground out from underfoot. Now, the room is quiet enough to hear the tick of a watch you can't see. We lift the next file, and the metal clip squeals the way a knife does when you pull it too slowly from a sheath. In that corridor of paperwork, a man's name keeps showing up, then slipping sideways.
He sits inside a small room that smells like motor oil and damp carpet. A trailer squats in a cluttered lot, wind lifting the corners of plastic tarps. On the wall, a calendar with fish leers out from behind greasy thumbtacks. The man is heavyset, hair thin, forearms pale where the sleeves end. He wears that smile some men put on when a joke has curdled inside them. He once taught children. He no longer does. The record says why. The resignation letter crackles like cellophane when an investigator pulls it from a drawer. Arthur Lee Allen lives close to the roads we trace with a fingertip. Vallejo is his orbit. A wristwatch glints in photographs, the face ringed by that little constellation of marks. A brand and a symbol, now welded together in a single word. On his shelf, a book about ciphers leans on a stack of hunting magazines. He tells someone, more than one someone, according to reports, about attaching a flashlight to a gun barrel to sight targets in the dark. He repeats a fantasy of stopping a school bus. The detail makes stomachs twist. The bus routes on the map turn into veins. A boot print at a lakeside crime scene measures a size that could fit his foot. A knife rests in a plastic bin in his kitchen, brown stain baked into the handle's grooves. He speaks of Lake Berryessa, of picnics and wind. His handwriting samples sit next to letters pulled from envelopes, and a magnifying lens clicks into place over them, breath fogging its rim. Interviews catch the flat thud of his voice. Detectives talk to him under white light. He answers and does not answer. Some nights he sits at a Formica table, gnawing at a strip of beef jerky while television voices blur together, and maybe he doesn't hear the phone ring. A neighbor says he liked knives. Another says he liked to watch. He shows a scar like a sailor's souvenir. It is nothing. It is something. Every piece feels like a tooth, missing a bite mark to match. A search warrant turns up a gift-wrapped box of ammunition, a typewriter with a chipped key, coils of rope, and a list of names that aren't victims but could be. The cuffs never close. His palm prints do not dance with the partials found on a cab door. His distributed weight creaks in a chair during questioning. He clears his throat and looks at the window, as if measuring distance. Casings rattle into evidence bags. A revolver is held like a sleeping bird, muzzle up, while the lab tech counts chamber rings and turns the cylinder with gloved fingers. Forensic work in that era is an orchestra without enough instruments. Handwriting analysis turns into a careful ritual, loops and strokes compared to curves on photocopied paper, each expert speaking in measured tones about likely and unlikely. Latent prints bloom under powder, bristles whisper across steel and paint. A fragment of a bloody fingerprint on a taxi's door frame looks like a fossilized fern under oblique light. Beautiful and maddening, partial and smudged. The laboratory smells like solvent and dust, and the fluorescent lights hum until your jaw aches. Blood means type, not genetic code. Secretor status trickles from saliva on a stamp, if it is saliva at all. Water could loosen adhesive just as well. The technician chops off corners of envelopes and soaks them in beakers, watching the cloudy swan of old glue drift apart. Chain of custody labels curl at the edges from damp cabinets. A microscope makes ballistics look like geography. Striations on a bullet become mountain ranges, where you hope a ridgeline matches another. The little notches never line up cleanly across scenes. One caliber repeats, but guns come by the thousand. Paper fibers get tweezed free and lined up under glass, their torn edges like shoreline maps that almost match a torn letterhead. Cigarette ash in a lakeside dirt drift offers nothing but texture. Cipher pages where the pinch marks of men pushing pencils so hard the lead snaps. In back rooms, codebreakers run fingers down grids inside composition notebooks, counting frequencies of symbols and trying to hear the mind inside them. A translucent overlay sheet slides across a page while a fan ekes out dead air. The clack of a typewriter builds a ladder of speculation. No database waits behind a monitor to connect distant towns. No digital photographs capture details that eyes miss. A lab Kodak turns evidence into squares of color that fade at the edges before you can order reprints. Aprons hang like limp flags. Exhaust fans cough. A phone on the wall sees too many hands and keeps its fingerprints like old breath. Other names crowd the periphery, wearing coats the mind can't help but try on. In Riverside, a library student with square shoulders and heavy boots becomes the subject of lunchroom whispers after a murder in '66, and the campus bulletin board grows thin around the thumbtack holes where his photo once hung. He scribbled in notebooks, wrote poetry in margins, haunted stacks that smell like paste. His stare looks wrong in hindsight. In San Francisco, a radio enthusiast collects film reels, spools tinkling like coins, a projector feeding light across a blank wall in a room where dust floats like plankton. He speaks in measured tones and smiles with only half his mouth. Somewhere else, a real estate agent with a dented head from an old car accident moves through bars and hotel lobbies with a fluid ease that makes witnesses point and then unpoint. A newsroom clatters. Linotype machines hot as engines, and a gaunt editor with a raptor's beak bends over galleys, red pencil brushing newsprint. Letters land on desks and not all of them are from the same hand, though hope and dread are eager liars. Investigators watch home movies of suspects waving on suburban lawns, noticing a watch face here, a wrist scar there, trying to trap the night in daylight gestures. Files thicken with tips scribbled on diner napkins. A woman calls from a payphone near a freeway, quarters pinging against the steel box, and claims her boyfriend once carved crosshairs into trees. Another man confesses with breath sour from whiskey, script changing every time he meets a uniform. A prankster mails a postcard that smells like damp basement, cut letters pasted from a magazine that ran out of paper ease halfway through. The case bleeds jurisdiction. Vallejo piles its forms. Napa seals its envelopes. San Francisco keeps its own cabinets. Riverside writes letters into a parallel timeline. Overlaps vanish in the boundaries. The 911 tape loses its crispness after too many replays. A composite sketch mutates slightly as it rephotocopies, shading migrating until a nose seems longer, a jawline less certain. Dates printed on photographs don't guarantee they were taken on those days. White doesn't care about metadata. Rumors about Lake Tahoe, about a nurse who vanished into a construction site, draw energy from radio chatter and then drain away in silence. The words, Bates had to die, flicker in carbon copy letters, and may be an arrow or merely a mirage stitched to the larger myth. Every allegation tugging at a sleeve, every denial dull with repetition. Time finds new tools, but they arrive late to a room already emptied. Years later, a lab runs adhesive scrapings from stamps through machines that whir like distant aircraft, pulling sequences of bases from the remnant goo. And the results murmur instead of shout. Contamination gets accusations of its own. The man with the watch dies of a heart attack, a television murmuring in the next room. Others fade into nursing homes, into photographs that curl in shoeboxes. The letters still live in climate-controlled drawers. The case number hasn't moved, yet everything around it has. That shift, so quiet you barely hear it, reshapes what suspect means every few years. In field reports, margins hold more truth than the body text. An officer remembers the peppery smell of gunpowder rising from the taxi's closed space and writes it down in handwriting, crowded to the right because his fingers shook. Another remembers the drag of nylon rope over bark at the lakeshore, a small sound under wind and splashing. The survivors define the case more than any paper can. A man with scars the color of old wax points at a lineup card and marks his choice, then wakes at night, decades later, when trucks back up outside and their beepers mimic a distant phone ring. The woman in a hospital bed presses lips that taste like saline and gauze and gives a face to a police artist who layers graphite like fog, careful and unsure. A pattern seems to form in those testimonies, and then it slides. We move toward a conclusion that refuses to conclude. Names become talismans. Arthur Lee Allen's file sits heaviest, but the boundaries of probability keep changing in the lamplight. An investigator holds his hands above a heater on a winter night and feels the ache in his knuckles, old fractures from too many doors kicked in January. He looks at copies of stationery from the Chronicle, compares envelope cuts to a stack of others, and feels the clock. One letter's ink has bled at the edges where humidity crept between fibers. Another keeps its lines sharp, the words still barbed. Across the bay, fog piles against the bridge cables, plucking a note you can feel through your teeth if you stand in the right spot. Somewhere in that sound, the case still breathes. If the answer hides among the known, it wears a mask tailored to its owner's face, not a costume bought for shock. The heavy man with the watch catches light on his wrist and draws eyes away from his hands. The editor in the newsroom smokes without inhaling, tapping ash into a tray like measuring time. The librarian hunches over microfiche, the light heating his cheeks. The agent orders a highball and watches condensation slide down the glass. The effect is hypnotic. There's a reason people thrive in the edges of any system. The corners do not get swept as often. Jurisdictional seams, lab limitations, human pride, these aren't footnotes, they're part of the architecture. A story like this calcifies while remaining soft at the core. The paint on the taxi peeled years ago. That photograph stands in for the metal now. A knife in a museum drawer no longer holds scent. What it carried went into the air and took the room with it. Detectives have funerals, and their notebooks fall into the hands of those who learned from them, but do not share their habits. The cipher, elegant and monstrous, ensures that even when solved, it still feels half unread. The symbol on the envelopes grows so familiar that it becomes scenery, and scenery is the first thing eyes stop seeing. In another trailer, newer, a young officer opens a folder and reads the same pages an older man once read, and hears the same hum from the lights, and thinks that perhaps no one ever left this room. A single page could snap the grip of silence and turn a lingering suspicion into a name carved in certainty. The figure in the hood at the lake becomes a man at a sink, rinsing his hands under weak, cold water, watching pink swirls go down and wondering if the stain will stay under his nails by morning. The bus routes change over decades, but parents still count spokes on a hubcap while the bus kneels and rises. A watch, sun-bleached inside an evidence bag, ticks no longer. Only the memory of its second hand hauling itself around the dial remains. Should the proof never surface, the case persists. Brick after brick, built from hard edges and softened recollection, a structure that makes its own weather. The page turns, and the lamp burns hotter, and the map waits, pins glinting, chords drawn taut as stringed instruments. Who stands behind the symbol in truth? A stranger beyond the file's borders, or a name we've spoken out loud all along?
Subscribe for more Midnight Legends.